Hello.
Hey.
Wonderful. And thank you to everyone for joining us on Big Bold Unapologetic on Gender Equity at Work. Joining me today, I'm Bianca Hartge-Hazelman of Financy, and I'm joined by the incredible Sandra D'Souza of Ellect. How are you, Sandra?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here.
Great. It's good to have you in my wonderful lounge room. It is a fake background because my office is what it is. It's a mess. Do you want to start just telling a little bit about yourself because you're extremely busy on LinkedIn, and I love sharing your posts and what you're doing because it really is pivotal, and we'll get into the subject matter, but it's very important to set the context as to why I'm speaking to Sandra. If anyone who doesn't know me, I've been a writer of the Women's Index and an economic tracker of gender financial equality for the past 8 years. We are at a place in time, I can let you know, for the next report that's coming out next week, where we are in striking distance from one of the key indicators of gender equality progress, which is fabulous, and we'll reveal that next week and talk about it in this forum as well, because it relates to leadership. And that's really what Ellect does, or a part of a big piece of what Ellect does, if you want to go into that.
Thanks, Bianca. Yes, it's very much a big piece. We're about increasing women representation in leadership and board roles. And it sounds something that should be already happening. But, as you know, that there is still very much a big gender gap with when it comes to leadership. There is a lot of research around boards, and there's quite a bit of activity in there. But when you look at board representation and women leadership, we're talking about less than 5% of companies who actually have even up to 25% of representation. So we're not talking about significant representation. It would be good if there's more. But certainly that's our work. And my background is a combination of corporate in the past, as well as being an entrepreneur, but as well as spending 20 plus years advocating for gender equality through an international NGO. And so Ellect is something that we consider ourselves as a disruptor, because there are lots of organizations doing amazing things, trying to tackle this, but we still have the gap. And it's like, okay, how do we really close the gap? And our solution is different from a lot of others.
Yeah, and I suppose why leadership is so absolutely critical, and there is debate on this notion of be what you can see. Recently, I'm reading a lot more about people saying, well, is that really how you get there? But what we do know about gender equity when we track and measure it is that the greater influence from the top, the greater the opportunities should effectively flow, or at least influence the culture, the policies, the practices. And these are the strategies that we'll get into in this session. But from a leadership perspective, we're seeing an increasing number of women in key leadership positions. But when we look at data from chief executive women, for example, the flow through isn't quite happening.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that's the thing. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I get very
No.
excited when it comes to talking about this sort of stuff. So that's the thing, is that there is obviously a lot of the highlights when we see a woman being appointed, and it feels like, wow, there's women leaders everywhere, but it's only still less than 5%. And that's where we just have to, if you kind of like combine it all with all the company data, we're not quite there yet, and it's still a long way. And if I share a personal note, I was in senior management very, very early on in my career in my 20s, and this is back in the 90s, by the way. And I really thought of myself as a middle-aged white guy, because that's what I was surrounded by. And
Yeah.
so I was also influenced
Yeah.
by not understanding, having to adapt to be a middle-aged white guy. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm married to one. It's just that you don't realize that how the policy, whatever initiatives and things like that, is very much what the majority would group think would sort of like implement. And I guess for me to just have one lonely voice in a predominantly kind of like one group of thinkers, it's very hard to push any initiatives there, and I would always be an outlier. And so the importance of having a diverse leadership team is to give that different perspective, and research keeps showing that diverse leadership teams do generate greater profitability. So it's not about just doing good, but it's about, like, for businesses, for organization, there are a whole series of benefits. And I know I'm going on a little bit on my soap dish, but
No, that's
like
good,
with
because
what
I'm
you
going to
said.
pick up on that one in a sec. So let's keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, and I guess like what you said, that there is now more women leaders, but it's being highlighted. So it feels like they're everywhere, but the data shows they're not.
Yeah. It certainly feels like there's so there's a few things to unpack there. One, diverse leadership. I want to get into the stats there about performance, because yeah, that is a prickly place to be. And then with respect to the numbers of women in leadership and being uh, in the pipeline, so to speak, and getting these opportunities. So there is this resistance that's been bubbling along, and it all really ties in. And there has been this increasingly vocal resistance there, saying that women are missing out on these key, men are missing out on these key management positions because we're only hiring women. But the data doesn't quite stack up there.
Yeah.
Without question, we are seeing companies put some targets around things, but are you really seeing that play out in your consultancy work on gender equity with big corporates?
Yeah, so a lot of our work, just to let you know, is directed to the actual women, like to the women. We've moved to more on a B2C level, kind of like approach, because we wanted to create as many impacts as women. But we also work with companies. It's just that we didn't want to limit that. In the companies, and I have various discussion on both groups, by the way. And I talk to a lot of men because we need to work with men in order to make this happen. And so from the men perspective and what's happening in companies, the companies are doing the right thing by establishing targets, DI programs, promoting women or people of diverse background. And exactly with what you said is that then there's like, okay, it's now not a good time to be a white man because you miss out on these opportunities. But the reality, and then the ones who do get promoted, I get a lot of discussion to say, oh, she's only up there because of the targets, and she's actually not qualified for the role or good enough for the role. And so, so it's become a problem. This DEI stuff doesn't work because we're not hiring the right people. People are not being hired on merits. So there's a couple of things that I said. In the past, how many managers have you known were hired on merit, or whether they came through because of network? But nobody says really anything about it because it wasn't a program. And why is it that when a woman gets hired, she needs to be perfect, she needs to be exceptional in order to prove that she belongs into that position? And so a lot of it is that unconscious bias and the perception to feel that, well, I've missed out, so you must be better than me. But it's never been the other way around. When men have been promoted into the roles, not because they were exceptional. So it is a prickly conversation, but I highlight this because I do say, how many managers in the past have you known that were promoted because they knew the boss, or that is through the networks, and not because of merit? And the answer would be 85%.
Yeah.
But we don't say anything. Not much is said about it.
Yeah. It is a disruption to the status quo. And I suppose we're going to see that play out with the new leader of the Liberal Party, for example. There's already been a lot of talk in the media around how that is a strategic play. Unfortunately, for somebody who is so very qualified for that position, that flavor has to come into it, unfortunately, in some quarters. And hopefully, my hope for that is, regardless of your political affiliations, is that we can break through some stigma there. Because in the past, we have traditionally seen women elevated to these key roles at a time of the worst possible time, when things are collapsing all around. And then if it fails further, it was her fault. So we don't want to see that. How do you prepare women in management for that? How is that not a deterrent to even want to push yourself for the greater good,
Exactly.
for your own good, for your
Exactly.
own potential? Yeah.
You know, that is such a brilliant question, Bianca, because when you see what happens to women leaders, especially with political leaders, with what happened with Julia Gillard, or now we're going to see with Susan Ley, is that the focus, their opinions, the criticism, the double standards, that what happens with women leaders compared to male leaders. So if I take a step back, and I don't know if you recall the whole Optus saga with the breaches, at the same time, is it the Medibank and a
Yes.
couple of other organizations had similar issues, but the Optus, there was a woman leader who was young, who was smart, who was absolutely capable, but she was absolutely vilified in media. Plus, the government ministers also, threw the bus at her. I think that's the saying. And so visually, it is very challenging. As much as you can be ambitious, but you think, wow, do I really want to put myself through that? Do I want to put my family through that? You think about that, and us, again, I'm not doing them and us, and I'm very much generalizing. It's there. I always do think about, like, I think a lot of women do, is like when you do something and there is a lot of negative media attention, you worry about the impact on your family as well, more so.
Well,
And
it's so
I'm not.
true. And that the negative attention, and it's also coming from offshore. It's Trump effect at the moment. It can put a dampener on your ability personally to want to push yourself in that direction, but also leaders. You do hear a lot of leaders say, there's women out there, but none of them apply. They don't
Oh,
apply,
yes.
you know.
Yeah, I
But
know. Well,
so this
there's a whole different
negative
discussion on that one.
attention, yeah. But I do question whether that negative perception around leadership, what it entails, the inability to have greater flexible work, or just the breathing down your neck, so to speak, is not a one aspect of why we don't see more women in leadership.
No, it isn't. And so the original question is like how to have more women, and with what's going on in the leadership role. There is research to show, like, that my advice, and this is my advice, but also research back this, is that there is research to show that the women who do progress to leadership roles, they did a whole comparison, kind of like with like some data, those who struggle and all that, and it ultimately came down to network. So you need to, like, the ones who do progress in leadership role, not only are they great with networking in terms of their peers and the people outside their network, but the third most important network is that they have an inside circle of their peers, or women peers, like a women professional circle of friends, to help them through those challenging times and have people to talk to. And that was the differentiator between, like, for those who didn't make it to the leadership role, found it as far more challenging compared to those who made it, so to speak. And is that support? So you're bad enough, you have double standards, and then you have negative media attention, but you get through it is when you have your network supporting you. And I guess that's the other element that we're pushing very much in Ellect, is that we're building a community of strong and kind women, and that is to support each other. It's almost like saying we've got each other's back. And if you allow me to, I know a bit of a talker, but if you allow me to expand a little bit more,
Yeah,
is
please,
that
because I'm going to throw things at you here. There are a lot of women's groups. There are a lot of professional networking groups, and we like these that are online or that fit in with our working schedule because reading something the other day that women just don't socialize enough. It's hard to find a friend when you're a mum, a real life
yep,
person that you send a
yep.
friend. So, what's different about the community that you need to create, that you are creating, and how does that really support aspiring leaders?
So the community that I've created, that when you walk into the room, whether in the room or so we're running it hybrid. So we have virtual audience as well as the ones in the room, because when we expanded, we didn't want to do lots of locations right away. So we expanded, and we have women from Europe, Asia Pac, Oceania who can participate in this room. And the feedback that I've got, which is also important to me, is that you go in there, you can unmask, because we all put on a mask. We all have to be that strong person, but you can actually be yourself when you relate and make the connections with each other. And we keep it, I guess, a little bit woo-woo talk here, this open energy, beautiful energy that we feel like we're making deeper connections. And so what happens out of that, what we see, and we've been running this for almost 2 years, or a year and a half actually, is that there are opportunities, whether it's jobs, whether it's business, that they are collaborating with. And what I've also found, I'm, like you, I'm big on research. And what I didn't know, and then the research support this, is that as women get older and progress through their career, they actually get lonelier. Compared to
Mm,
men, they
yeah.
actually have more and more support. And when I say lonelier, it's not like saying, oh, we're all a sad bunch of women. The reason why we're getting lonelier is because we are so capable, and we look after our family, we look after our partners, we look after our team, we look after our friends, we look after our extended family. But who looks after us? We don't ask for help. We just think, oh, no, we'll sort everybody out. I'm strong. I can handle it, kind of thing. And so that's the difference with Ellect community, is to say, why don't we look after each other and support each other, and let's have each other's back. And that,
Nice.
which I didn't know, kind of like essentially how it evolved, even putting that energy into it, Ellect has grown. You were talking about like how busy and things are happening. Ellect has grown is because this same community that I'm building has got my back, has given me the support, the encouragement, and the confidence to go and venture and make this into a bigger thing than it is.
So
And it's terrifying when you grow.
you personally have grown from your own,
Because
yeah,
Exactly, from my own network, which I didn't say, "Hey, I'm doing this so then you can support me." It was none of that, because I was looking after everybody,
yeah,
and then also sharing the research, and
yeah,
then I also received like, "Oh, Sandra, how about, like, who's got your back?" I was like, "I don't know. I'm okay. I'm strong. I can handle it all. Don't worry about me. I want to make sure you're all okay." But then they would give me ideas. They would email me feedback, how to make it better, and yeah, just helping
mm,
me to grow one way or another. They say, "Oh, Sandra, we will bring somebody oh, you should talk to this person. We think you should try this way." And all that is through the network.
yeah. Now, you said something earlier about diversity in leadership and performance. So, when we start to look at the gender equity in the workplace, what business leaders can do to support um, the financial make sense case is increasingly important. And I'd argue that because of what we've seen in the States in particular, and some of the companies that have been quick to follow suit and drop D&I policies, it is more important than ever that we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the framework of culture and inclusion, and that we look at the data and their performance.
Yeah.
Where can it be correlated? Um, when you talk about diversity, gender diversity in leadership, I think there is more of a parallel to do with performance. What data do you look at? Because
So
obviously profits, there's a hell of a lot that goes into it. What
yeah,
do you look at?
and I think So the data that I look at it's very much around the profitability, but there is also research to back innovation type of thing. And so for businesses that are led by women, when it comes to startups and the growth, there's research to show that the return on investment, if any investors invest with a women CEO type of startup or founders, they tend to perform better with funding kind of thing. We're talking about the VC side. So when they put investment into those businesses, but but the only less than, as you know, less than 3% of the funding goes to women entrepreneurs. So there is a disconnect. Um, and the book that I did like interviewing the leaders who have achieved gender balance, and I asked them like, how did you do it? Why did you do it? That sort of thing. Very much, they've quoted books. Also, there's one book in particular called Exponential Organization that talks about that diverse teams do help you grow exponentially. And so it's not just, I'm not, saying all women, you get a women CEO, that's it. You're going to be much better in terms of like profitability and things like that. What the research have shown is by having diverse leadership team, you bring in a different perspective, and that helps you with your customer offering. So your products to the market is more suited to the market, and you have all different perspective that you just connect better to your market, and that's why you've grown. And there was one particular interview that didn't make it to the book, but I really love this, what he said, the CEO. He said that there is an expectation that when you're a CEO, you're supposed to know everything. And the reality is you obviously don't know everything. And so he deliberately hires diverse team so that he can get that different perspective and that knowledge to help him make a better decision for the business. And so I guess between the data and between, I guess, the real life conversations that I've had, plus books written about it, ultimately, by having a women CEO is basically you're bringing diversity into the leadership. And that's the first start. That's why they perform better.
So how important, it's one thing I'm always pulled up on when I present the Women's Index is where's the data on the intersectionality? And of course, that kind of data is like hen's teeth. That ABS doesn't publish it, can't get data on First Nations women when we break things down. It's really difficult, let alone other backgrounds. How important is diversity within gender diversity?
Very important, I think, is to understand how much even harder it is, because women you're talking about, and I'm being very broad, by the way, for words, and not excluding LGBTIQ, when it comes to gender, but 50% of the population are women, and they're being excluded in organization, especially in leadership, whether it's government, in business, or corporates, and so. What research again have shown is that when you make changes to include women, you'll be including other diverse groups as well.
Right.
That's what.
Mm-hmm.
So, however, like you said, it's very hard to get data of the diversity, and there is some McKinsey published, like they have some data with women of color and the different ethnic groups, whether it's Black women or Latina women, but that's about it. We need disabled women, and there is an assumption that they don't want to work, but obviously they do. I mean, disability is such a big range, so why lump it all into one type of thing? So there is a need for all of that data, and I don't understand why it can't be captured. But I guess seeing what's happening in US is that if you're a woman of color to access funding, like 3%, like I said, less than 3% for women of color, we're talking about 0.01%, something like that.
Yeah.
And so data helps us raise awareness of what's going on rather than our opinions of what's going on. That's why I talk a lot about data, to communicate the gaps and what workplace, like what Gia is doing, pushing the gender gap and, trying to reduce the gender gap, I should say, and reporting those data is to raise awareness, because by making everybody aware of the lack of inclusiveness when it comes to the other groups, it's just showing that we're still isolating them. We're not recognizing that there is a problem.
It's the WGEA data that was out yesterday, for context on that, the public sector. First time we've ever seen these public sector breakdown of gender pay gaps by the organisation, and overall it came in around 6%, which is half than the national average, which is sitting just under 12% when you look just at ABS statistics. Of course, WGEA's data, when it looks at its 100 plus organisations of about 5,000 organisations, it's sitting at about 20%. So it is doing really well from a public sector perspective in terms of the average gender pay gap. That's not to say the outliers don't exist, they do. So the spotlight on that has helped to drive change. How important is it, if we look at strategies for business, to collect data? Obviously, I love data. I
Yeah.
get a lot of stories, and I think it's incredibly important for advocacy and informing a framework for change. Are there key things you look at with data? Should there be quotas? What targets should be set? What do you think is important there?
Definitely targets. I think from a business perspective, targets will be set. And I know that there is a lot of, I guess, grumblings around that. But once we achieve, so the tipping point is 30%. And so once we achieve greater than 30%, that's when we'll see change. And the thing is that we need to get to the part of the world, let me rephrase that. We need to be at that point where we won't bat an eyelid when we see diverse leadership and there's no media stories around it. And it's just like, oh yeah, it's just part of the norm. And so that there's no additional discussion. It's like, it's just normal. And that's where we need to be at. But in order to get there, we've had affirmative action since the 80s, right? With the affirmative action legislation that came in, and we're in the 2025. And so, without targets, and only since the targets, things are beginning to shift. So we need the targets. It needs to happen. And it will get to the stage where what's been set up. So we'll have, things, companies will do blind CVs or whatever the systems to take away the bias, so that people do get promoted on merit.
Yeah.
And not the hidden biases that gets in the way. And that organization is set up to include flexible workplace, to include the cultural components, to make it still because also that the adjustments, they think, oh, that's going to affect profit. But you'll be surprised. I mean, look at 4-day weeks. The 4-day weeks is proving.
We haven't even really gone there yet, have we? I mean,
No.
So you like targets, you think they're important. I feel that definitely as part of policies and practices, organisations increasingly need those in the workplace. Even I'd say probably starting those from around 20 plus employees, you need to be really having frameworks in place that support culture, if nothing else.
Yes.
And to support culture, it's about, okay, listening to the people around how does your organization sit with flexible work, anti-discrimination, promotional processes, pay gaps, for example. There are simple things that organizations can start with there. The targets can come within those. And I think targets are good when you think of them as goals and aspirations and what we're working towards. Do you see enough evidence of organizations? Well, let me rephrase that. Are organizations pinkwashing too much, or are they not saying enough when they're doing good?
Yeah, I thought I came up with that word of pinkwashing, but I love it that you use it. It is pinkwashing. And so the book is actually what I've learned how many organizations do pinkwashing. is that you will see the DI policies and everything up to the middle management. But then when you don't see diversity in senior management, it's like they're not practicing what they preach. It's okay to say, yeah, we'll help everybody and all the diversity, but I do not want you to be one of my peers. And that's where pinkwashing kicks in. And I've seen that, one of the examples I gave in the book was I went to an event where I was a panel, one of the panel speakers, and there was a speaker, and I won't name any names, and he spoke about very inclusive policy in his very large organization. And I was actually really impressed. I just thought, wow, that's amazing. How come it was actually quite forward thinking. And then I did my presentation where I talk about the gender balance, the reason for the book, and the criteria that we saw. And the criteria that I just said, we just do 4 points. You get a point if you have a woman CEO or CFO. You get a point if you have a woman board chair, 25% women on boards, or 25% women in C-suites. And if you get at least 3 points, you get, we have accreditation, and that we see that you committed to gender equality or gender balance at the top. So after the whole presentation, we went towards the networking area, grabbing a glass of wine, and he came up to me and says, oh, I was thinking about your criteria. And this is a guy which I was jaw dropped because he was like very impressive DEI policies and practices. And he says, oh, our organization, we would probably score 2 out of 4. And I said, oh, why is that? He says, oh, it's going to take some time to get women leaders. I mean, they have to go and have babies, and, it's just not going to work. And then my jaw dropped again. And so this is the dilemma, is that, yes, you have the policy and the practices, but you need this, like, do you believe in it? And it shows when you don't have gender balance in the top, is when you don't believe in it, when you think having babies gets in the way for women to be a leader. And I know that he didn't mean it in a malicious way, or something. It's just what that whole unconscious bias that kind of creeps in, and then it forces our action. So with the policy, I know you talk about the 20 plus, and I've started business, and you and I, when we were like the first one in, and you don't have the big company policy and things like that. But I do think the framework needs to happen from startups. That that they may not be ready for it, but they're aware of it. They like, I would love to, maybe this is something that you and I can do, is like, let's put together a framework for startups to say, these are the HR policies. We know you don't have any employees, but when they start coming in, and just be mindful, it's like, it's hard for a small business to implement a lot of that, but it's setting the culture from the beginning. Because when you set the culture up to 20 employees, and then you go, okay, everybody, we're 20 plus, you need to do this. It's just like saying, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? It's going to disrupt our business. So
no, that's a really good idea, actually. We have gone over, but I just had one more question, because you said something before. I could keep talking for ages. Role modeling. I mean, this comes into the whole leadership sphere, but when we think of the power of leaders in an organization, when setting gender equity at work, it goes into so many aspects around flexible work, parental leave, removing the gender stigma around that. Even those discussions like the one you've just highlighted, the attitudes and things like that. How do you influence that? How do we, is that something that's got to be challenged from the top, but that's got to be a willingness to take that on at the same time, which is a bit harder.
I think it needs
unless
to be a
reputational damage is a threat.
I know. Money and reputational damage is the only reason. Like ESG, you can see the reason there are some changes is because of ESG, and then the investors saying, like, we won't invest unless you do this. And so a lot of money is a driver to make change. And when ASX or the stock market say, look, we need to have you achieve these targets, otherwise you're off. It's like, oh well, it's about money ultimately, and that's what driving the change. So those sort of targets and money is driving the change for those who are reluctant to do it, but change needs to come from the top. It has to
Can
come from the
upward
top.
pressure help?
Maybe, but I think market pressure probably would be far more powerful as well. Upward pressure would be if the talent all leaves
Yeah.
because of the environment. But the outside pressure seems to be, and there's 3 outside pressure, and it's either government, like, or regulatory, market, like from the customers. And so there are customers, like those of you have larger contract, one of the things that they want to see is what where are you at with the gender or diversity within your organization, otherwise you won't win this contract. So there is also that sort of like market pressure, and it can also come from the consumer level, and then the talent pressure is the third, which it's harder to achieve doing it inside in from inside out. But what I've researched from the book and all that, the difference between the companies that I researched was less than 5% in the stock exchange compared to 95% who didn't achieve gender balance, is that it all came from the CEO driving it, or the C-suite. Like, I interviewed COO who says this is what we need to do, and they have a supportive CEO and they have a supportive board chair to make it happen.
Yeah. So you need that cocktail at the
Yeah.
top.
You need the willingness to change. So that's the thing. They may not know how to do it, but there needs to be a willingness, and then the awareness from the data to show, okay, this is how we can do it, or how others have benefit from it.
So the performance threat is around reputation, but it's also retention. You're doing a lot of work, I see, in trying to help female leaders, aspiring leaders, find the right organization. How important is culture and fit in recruitment, for people who have had jack of a certain workplace, they're looking for something better? Is it all about money in this economic environment and finding the next best step for yourself? Or what are you hearing from people that they want when it comes to finding a new place to work?
Very much a culture fit. I think, especially with the younger talent, that is very big on the, in terms of the criteria, but even before money type of thing. Money is important because I know with the higher living costs that we have, we need that. But working just for money makes people miserable, especially in an environment that's really miserable. And so some would do it, but there you can only do it for so long, and your performance will be affected by that, because you dread working there, you dread dealing with the people there, you don't want to be there, and yet you have to be there because of money. And so when you find an organization that not only do you get paid well, but you also enjoy the culture and the team and the environment and the leadership, the talent get retained. And then and also when you see the leadership saying, hey, we're committed to diversity, we're committed to gender, and I want to take the example of your impactor system. They do the survey, they show the results, they say we want to improve, and then they see the management doing things to improve. This is also what I've written in the book. Not only do you need the commitment from the top, but you empower the leadership team and you put the policy in there. And if you have that visibility, which Impactor has, to show how the organization are achieving, and that you reevaluate every 3 months, 6 months, a year, then that's commitment to say, okay, this organization is really doing what they said. They may not have achieved it now, but they're not just talking about it. They're not just pink washing. They're doing it, but it's taking a little bit longer, but we're seeing baby steps of progress. And what I love about Impactor is that measurement to show those baby step of progress, because you can have the perception and say, oh, they're just talking about it, but we don't see anything. But Impact involves the whole organization with a survey, and then they, publish the results. They can see the results if they want to share it with the team or with the whole organization to say, look, not a great result, or we're sort of still going there, but we want to get to there. This is how we're going to measure it. We need all of your help. And I think that feeds into the culture.
Thank you. So that's Impactor. If anyone wants to find out more, let me know. But what I've learned from my own journey with this and Impactor and the Trump effect is that brand image is very important. Culture is very important. These are key performance drivers, right? so for me, from a communications perspective, what I haven't seen enough of, and I think it has been an issue with a lot of DEI frameworks, is the ability to communicate what needs to be done so that everyone gets what is being done and understands it and feels part of the process, and to make sure that the communication efforts that are happening are not pinkwashing. And I suppose that's why with Impactor we've evolved the offering to offer a culture comms perspective. Um, how do you hear anything about the communication, messaging, and actions? Because there's one thing providing data, it's a
Yeah.
whole other thing doing the work and then getting the buy-in from your people around the work. And I feel like that's been a critical issue with the dismantling of DEI in the States. But you've been
Yeah.
there recently. You would have heard a hell of a
Yes.
lot more.
Yes, I was in DC at the end of February, and I'm glad that I came back before just before International Women's Day, because they've changed a lot of the borders, and so I would have been quite nervous if I was traveling a little bit later. But what I
Yeah.
saw, that was Trump was only just over a month of since inauguration, and it's already been a lot of chaos. But there was a lot of, like, I wouldn't say sadness, but disappointment of the dismantling of the whole DI program. So it was a global diversity conference, and there were a lot of companies who have shrunk their DI program, have abandoned those policy, have reverted back, saying we're not going to worry about that.
Mm.
But there were also global companies, is what's happening in the US. But there were other companies who says no, like Apple, JP Morgan, L'Oreal, saying we're not dismantling those.
Goldman Sachs,
Goldman Sachs,
Disney,
yep,
Costco. I am
yep,
seeing a growing list. And even, with Australia's Accenture, I would
yeah.
wager how much they've wound back DEI initiatives with when you walk past the Barangaroo site. You know,
Well,
it's very
the
clear
reason
to me that that hasn't been dismantled here.
no, because the reason why they essentially, like, or Deloitte's, I think Deloitte's as well, that they had to walk
Yeah.
away from it, is because the US government said, if you want our contracts, you can't have a DI program. And I'm
Mm.
just really summarizing it. So they were
Yeah.
at risk of losing a lot of that, and they have to be and they have to be seen that they're dismantling it. McDonald's is also another one,
Yeah.
Kathleen. So they didn't want to lose the government contracts, but the discussion is that what's happening in US for the global companies, try not to influence the rest of the world with your companies and follow the local laws. And that's where you'll get to see is that the companies who want the entire organization to dismantle the DI program, that means that they were pinkwashing. They didn't really commit to it.
Yeah.
The ones who says, let's contain it in US because of the uh,
Well,
craziness in US.
it isn't it? It
Yeah,
was do the DEI, align, support your ESG reporting.
yeah,
Let's be honest here,
yeah,
and uh, support the perceived reputational benefits from it. So the pendulum had swung one way.
yeah,
It has swung wildly back for some organizations. And I think we're going to land somewhere in between, but it's a reinvention of diversity and inclusion to potentially more of a culture focused performance um, regime.
yeah, yeah.
Regime's a
And
wrong
look,
word.
I know, well, it is what's happening over there in
Mm,
US. But the whole swing of the pendulum, like the targets and things like that, that's the swing in order to bring it, like I said, that it becomes our new normal, is that nobody bats an eyelid when you see diverse
yeah,
leadership.
yeah,
Just and with US, what was discussed, how much US have lost all that progress in the last 50 years. They've
yeah.
lost like, women have lost their rights to their body for a lot of the
Mm,
states, in the States.
mm.
They've lost, like, the diverse
19 states,
program
I
is
think.
gone. Yep, yep.
Mm,
And so what was fought very hard has all been wound back. and they're trying to put more into it. So it'll be interesting to see what's happening over there. But I really hope we don't go so far back. Like, this is not the start of something, but seeing what's happening in Canada, what's happening in, like, what happened in Australia with the elections, that I think it's the people power to say, we don't want to wind all that back to where it was. We don't want to follow what's happening in US. That's my guess, but
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. I feel I think it was scary for a time. I think it's been a focus point for many in this space as to how best we go forward. And I think I'm seeing evidence of an increasing number of companies go forward a little bit differently or stronger.
yes.
So
Yes.
it's not over. It is very much there to stay for many organizations, and potentially, arguably, will be demanded on by younger generations ever more so, because they've become used to it. It's not something that 50 years can easily be unwound when you grow up expecting your rights to be met in certain ways.
Correct. And
Yeah.
I think I do feel there's this bit of hope, and like you said, with the companies, with individuals who would want to keep pursuing, and like your statement, big, bold, and unapologetic on gender equity at work. That's it's something that not only one person can do, and it's not about having a powerful leader. It's we all need to kind of like collaborate and keep going. So that's where I do feel like it was worrying. I agree with you, but then I do feel a sense of hope because of the companies saying, nope, we are not going to wind back our policies as individuals who says we're going to work for companies who support DEI, and just standing up to not only what's right, but also makes business sense as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I could keep talking. You just making more ideas come into my head. Thank you so much for today. This has been recorded, so I will repeat it. And it's just a delight, Sandra, to be speaking with you. Your website, you want to give it a quick plug if anyone wants to reach out?
Yes, Ellect.biz, B-I-Z, is our website, and I'm on LinkedIn, so also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yep, wonderful. And I'm on LinkedIn too, or financy.com.au/impact, or if you want to find out about culture comms, hit me up on that one. But Sandra, a delight, and your book as well, Bias and Equality, Bias to Equality, sorry.
From bias to equality. I know the word's a bit smart. Yes.
Terrible of me, sorry about that. But yes,
No.
wonderful. So we'll speak again soon. Thank you so much,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate that.